Welcome to the Investor Coaching Show. Here's your host, Paul Winkler.
And welcome to the Investor Coaching Show. I am Paul Winkler. As always, talking the world of money and investing. And also join with me today. This doesn't always happen. Ann Swaski here and Evan Barnard. Whoop.
Yeah.
Where's my ice cream?
Whoop, whoop. I thought about bringing some, actually.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Those of you that don't know, that is, everybody's got to have a weakness. You can't go through life with no weaknesses.
It only took me 16 years to find yours, but by golly, I finally found a way to poke the bear.
It is tough.
It is
half
true.
of the stuff he puts in his mouth, I don't even know what it is, honestly.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I have all these friends of mine. They will, if they're going to get me something, it'll be like one of these gift cards for an ice cream shop.
Oh, super.
And I got several of them I haven't used yet because I really don't do it as much as people think. I'm way more disciplined than people actually think I am, but I joke about it a lot.
I'll be raiding the desk drawer after the show.
That's not where they are. Okay, so we talk finance here, and I know, Ann, that you always have come loaded for bear on things, and I have things to talk about, and a lot of topics to really get into today. There's just a lot of stuff going on, is there not, in the world of finance? And
Always, yeah.
it's always something. Yeah, it's like Rosanna dance.
Yeah.
It's always something.
We can send men to the moon, but we can't
There you
make
go.
an investment without a prospectus.
That's right. Okay, so I'll let you go, Ann. You start off. Where are you going to start?
Well, I thought this was an interesting article. John Foster talking about how to do multi-generational planning and the psychology of big wealth.
Ooh. Okay,
So,
now you're talking my language.
Swinging
here.
for the fence right off the bat.
All
why
right.
not? Why not?
I like it.
So I
Okay.
don't know. I just thought this was interesting because this gentleman, he owns a firm that deals with legacy wealth type people. He said a lot of their clients, high net worth clients, have been dealing with wealth since the 1800s.
Wow.
Or they could be new money, quote unquote, might be a guy that started a business and it just took off, right?
Okay.
So what he does with them, which is different than the average investor, and I think we can all.
Oh, that's kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's kind of
sometimes
interesting.
people think there's a secret sauce with wealthy people that doesn't exist and they think differently. So
Right.
I'll be really curious to hear what you have to say here.
Yeah, so I thought this was kind of fascinating. So he said that the ultra high net worth families, he said they're not the ones that come in your office and say, how did my investment do versus the S&P 500?
Well, it's kind of like Warren Buffett saying,
Yeah.
I put all my wife's money when I pass away into an S&P 500 fund. You know why? Because you can put up with all the risk in the world, and you could put up with 20 years of no returns like the
Right.
S&P has provided historically in some times, and it wouldn't be a big deal. She wouldn't run out of money. She still has billions.
Right,
Right, exactly.
So I thought, now that's kind of an interesting insight. So he said that they have a better ability to think multi-generationally and that they are not as worried about what the current return is, but how it's invested for the long term multi-generationally.
Well, I would
So-
think that you're dealing with trust work quite often, and a lot of people don't have to jump through all those hoops. Where you have to go and set up things and do some kind of a irrevocable trust, and then now you don't have to necessarily. Well, gosh, I think about trusts and think one of the things that you're dealing with when you're dealing with trusts, Evan, is what? What's the biggest issue with trusts?
Well, the law could change, for one thing. taxes,
Thank
the
you,
tax
taxes.
issues. Yeah.
Yeah, the taxes, as I think about. And, one of the things that we talk about here on the show all the time is that, as an investor, what is the biggest reason that investors fail? Biggest reason. Oh, this is your
behavior.
favorite. I was going to say it's your favorite question, Evan. You don't.
I wasn't sure if it's a trick question.
This is not a trick question.
I'll take behavior for 500. Paul.
This is totally up your alley.
All right.
Yeah. So behavior being that people trade too often.
Right.
And they try to figure out where markets are going to go. They try to figure out which stocks are going to do better than others. Well, what would be the death knell of creating terrible, terrible tax problems with a trust would be anything where you're trading and you're realizing capital gains. So they're allowed to maybe let things sit and simmer longer than the average investor, and probably for that reason alone would probably have better returns since they're not messing around with it.
Yeah.
And because they're not messing around with, they're not worried about returns. But the irony of it is because they're not worried about returns, they probably end up with better returns.
That's
because
true.
they're not doing the things that they think
cause the taxation
and the things they think they have to do to get higher returns, which
Correct.
don't result in higher returns. Yeah, isn't that funny? Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, the other thing that he was saying is it's important to establish goals and define the legacy for the clients. So he said, I'll ask them, is your goal to be the richest person in the graveyard or bounce the check to the undertaker? Now, I know a few voters that would say the latter. But
but it's funny though how people. I was talking to somebody the other day. We were talking about the aging process in general, and I said, "Isn't it funny how?" And I said that. You know what it was? I was at a Trevecca meeting, I was actually mentioning this to a bunch of people around the table, all these professors, and I made the comment that I feel like I live life in a time machine, as I like to tell people. I see people in their 20s, what they think about in their 30s, what they're in their 40s. And if they're in their 40s, I tell them that I know what you're going to be thinking about in your 50s. I know what you're going to be dealing with in your 60s and 70s. So I'm in a time machine where I can tell you kind of what's coming. And I'm going to tell you if you're in your 40s and you got that bumper sticker that says, I'm going to spend my kids' inheritance or my grandkids' inheritance.
Right.
That typically people's mindset changes and they don't like the bounce the last check.
Right.
They don't like that. They go, wow, you know what? I'm not going to be around on this planet forever, and I do want to leave something.
Right. So that's the third option is, do you want to create a legacy supporting your family intergenerationally or philanthropically with your charities or community, et cetera? So when they define those goals, of course, that then, which is we do our true purpose for money.
For
That's
sure.
really what that is. But helping them define that so that they can start directing it, especially if they're first generation wealth. They don't know how to do it. They don't.
Right. That makes total sense because how do we know how to raise kids? We watched our parents raise us.
Right.
Right.
It's the same thing. How do we know how to do anything? It's typically somebody that did it before us, for sure. Yeah.
Right. So that's where having advisors, financial advisors and attorneys and accountants that can help with that process are really valuable because it's something that, especially if you're not a multi-generational wealth family, it's totally new to you. So we need help on those things.
And sometimes herding bias isn't terrible.
Yeah.
That is following what other people do, is for those of you that don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, those three questions, I don't really think would be limited to the ultra high net worth investor.
Well, I agree.
I think somebody could have 400 grand, $1 million, you can define ultra high net worth however you want. But I think all clients really have those three options. I want to bounce my last check. I want to leave something to family and charity or so forth, or I just don't want to be a burden. That's kind of the middle road for most people.
Right. But that's why I think this is such an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
Because I think really when you look at the way he's handling higher net worth people, why is it really any different?
They're people. Yeah.
Yeah. It's,
years
right?
and years and years ago, I actually did it. I know you guys heard me tell this story before, but I usually talk about a different aspect of the story, which was when I did the commencement speech for one of the local colleges, and they had this. They said, "Hey, could you come in and speak?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And they said, "I heard you're a good speaker." Blah blah blah. I'm like, "Okay, great, thank you. What do you want me to talk about?" And he goes, "I don't know. What do you want to talk about?"
Market timing.
I will never I will never forget that. What do you want me to talk about? That conversation. And he goes, "I don't know." And I said, "You know what? I'm going to talk about a study that I just saw." And he goes, "What was it?" And I says, "Study of seniors, age 90 plus, as I recall.
Wow.
And the 3 things that they would do differently if they could live their lives over again."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Oh, wow, that sounds cool." So what it was is, number one, that they would have taken more risks. They would have stepped out and they would have done things. You always hear that. What would you do if you knew that you couldn't fail, right?
Right.
That type of thing. The second thing is that they would have spent more time contemplating. Which is, what am I here for? What do I want to do? What do I want life to look like?
Yeah.
Now, I added a 4th thing because
the
I thought it
third?
was and I'm going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to the 3rd yet.
I missed something.
You were really sharp picking up that he
Nailing
skipped
it.
one.
Nailing it, baby. Yeah, so the 4th one I added was that they would actually, because a lot of people say that they would continue the education process. And that has always been something that I said that I would do something every single year after I graduated from college. And I think I've been pretty good at doing that, constantly staying in education. The 3rd thing was that they would have created something that survived them. And these are people
Yes,
90 years old.
yes.
So that's why I think this is a fascinating conversation.
Right.
People want to know, and the example that I often give is when we went camping as kids. And I will never forget, my father, we would pull out of the camp. See, we had one of these campsites, it's a dirt, dirt, and it's a little cutout area. And it was very heavily wooded area that we would go, this campsite in upstate New York in the Adirondack Mountains. And we would go in there and we would camp and then we would leave. We'd pull the campers out into the road off to the side so people could still get around. And we would rake. First of all, we would build a fire for the next people that came in. We would build them, we'd set up the wood, and we'd leave them a note on how much we loved camping there. And we would leave this note in front of, we'd put kindling in there. We'd leave some firewood all set up for them to set their first fire when they got to the campsite.
Oh, so you didn't keep it lit.
No. We would set it up so they could do that. And then
Nice.
we would rake the entire campsite, kind of like you'd rake a shag rug in the 70s. And that place looked, and we would leave it better than we found it. Was the idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's the idea behind legacy to me, is thinking in terms of that, is leaving a place better than you found it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's perfect. And here's the other interesting thing with the higher net worth. He said he would often help them by not focusing on the money, but on their happiness in life, because he found a lot of them, they were very successful in their businesses or whatever, but he'd say, "Why am I not successful at home?"
Right.
So
Yeah.
this particular...
What Happy People Know, that book.
Yeah.
That
yeah.
was that guy's story. Basically, unhappy, miserable, terrible marriage. And he would get into arguments with his wife, his kids, and they didn't like, and that was the whole thing, is get him to start focusing on other people. And
Right.
the thing that I remember from that book so much is that, that he literally told him the first assignment, go to the kids' cancer ward. And he goes, what do you mean go to kids? He says, you want to be happy, don't you? He goes, I'm not that unhappy.
Do you remember the name of the author offhand?
I do not.
Because I'm thinking that Justin had sent me a heads up. This is now like probably 4 or 5 months ago. That I think he's a Harvard MBA professor that actually wrote the book, and he was talking about contentment and happiness. And there's a course that he teaches in the MBA program that's it's always full to the gills with students.
Dan Baker. Just looked it up.
Okay, can't recall.
Yeah. So this guy was a therapist.
Yeah.
And what he did was he had this client that was a rich guy who took copious notes when he was doing the therapy sessions. He would write everything down.
The client would?
Yeah, the client would write everything down,
okay.
and he literally had all these things he had the guy do. And and then what ended up happening at the very, very end, things are better. His life's better, and he's going, "Oh my gosh, things are so much better." And he goes, "Can you do me a favor?" As I recall from the book, he said this. Dan Baker said this. I don't think I'm confusing the book. I'm pretty sure this is it. He said, "Could you give me your notes? I want to write a book." And that was it.
Yeah.
The same one?
No, this guy's Arthur Brooks.
Arthur Brooks. No. That's Arthur Brooks.
How to Be Happy.
Oh, heck yeah. Arthur Brooks is great. Oh, yeah.
And it was a great, about an hour lecture on some of the results of some of that research. Really fascinating.
Yeah. Arthur Brooks is fascinating because he gets into the 2 stages of life. When you have the first stage in your life, fluid intelligence is what it's all about. You create things, you come up with new things, you're able to solve problems really, really well. You're able to calculate math equations a lot quicker than an older person would. An older person maybe used to be able to do it,
right?
But now they can't anymore. Their brain doesn't work quite as quickly in that particular manner. But the older person has wisdom that they've accumulated that the younger person doesn't have. They have all the stories and things that have happened to them. So Arthur Brooks, phenomenal.
What do you call it? Crystal intelligence?
Crystallized intelligence.
Crystallized
That's
intelligence.
correct. Crystallized intelligence. That's correct.
Yeah. So anyway, another one, which this is an obvious one, right? But determining stock allocation for clients. And he said, when someone asked me, with the people of great wealth, how much money should I have in stocks? The answer is, I don't know. The answer is the right allocation and risk assets is the maximum amount you can own and never get scared out of the market no matter what happens.
Yeah.
Now, I think
works for everybody.
I think here's my thing about that. I think you can educate a person to the right asset mix.
Right.
Because risk tolerance is problematic, and the studies have shown it to be the problem because when markets go down, everybody's risk intolerant.
Right.
When markets go up, they're risk averse. They're like, bring it on, baby. The market's going up. And that's so. I think that is partially true.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think certainly our philosophy is that our education will help keep you
no question
from making that singular worst mistake.
Yep.
By panicking and selling or whatever.
Yeah, as I often tell people, if you're sitting there worried about the market going down, if the market goes down and never comes back up, it's because earnings went away, and if earnings go away, taxes go away. If taxes go away, the government goes away, and everything falls apart. So you start to understand that it's not as scary anymore.
That's true. So anyway, and then just the last thing is long-term compounding of money in a tax-aware manner, which we kind of addressed earlier.
Yeah.
But the other thing he gets into a little bit is the wealthy and unhappy part is because I've seen this. I used to sell businesses. Very often successful business owners don't have a child to take over the business. So they look at it and they're not happy with their children because they want them to be something they're not. And so that is a struggle that business owners have to deal with when they're selling, or maybe they're not selling and they want to keep it as a legacy, but they don't have an heir that is capable.
Well, and so often, when you see when somebody's trying to control what their child turns out to be.
Yeah, because that's really kind of what we're talking about.
And that always works out really well.
Well, and I often have to tell people, you got one person you got control over. You ready who it is? Look in the mirror. That's pretty much all you have control over. You can only control how you respond to people.
Yep.
And God makes us all different.
Right.
So often when some kid takes over your business, they run it into the ground. That's why so few businesses last beyond, one generation, right?
Right, 2 or 3 at the most usually. But and so that's part of the lack of happiness.
Yeah.
Is they are unhappy because that child isn't meeting their expectations. So what do you do about that? And is it even a
Is
realistic
that a question
thing?
for me? 'Cause-
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
well, it's interesting because when you look at, let's say, an experiment. Let's say we were doing a laboratory experiment and we were trying to figure out how people respond under pressure. What's the best way to actually see how somebody's going to respond under pressure? And the answer is to watch them. Watch them. And so many times what parents do, they're watching, they're trying to control, they're trying to do what they can, and it actually puts the kid under greater stress, and they respond even worse under that type of stress. And whereas when we look at it and go, what did God put the kid on the planet to do? What are their gifts and talents? What is it that they do really, really well? Where do they lose? I always loved it because a friend of ours, of all of ours here at the table, Mark would always say, what is it that you do that when you're doing it, you lose track of time?
Yeah.
Because that tells you when you're in your element, when you're really doing what you're designed to be doing. And you just lose track of time because you're in your gifts and your talents and the things that you really do well. And, what kind of problems can you solve? If I were in trouble, let's say, or the way he would put it is this.
Yes.
If one of your friends was in trouble, what would they call on you for?
Great question.
What would they need? And I always love that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, to me, that's where the rubber meets the road. Trying to force your kid into the position of doing what you do is sometimes the kid that will be their area of talent. I've seen it happen, but a lot of times you're trying to fit a round peg through a square hole, and it just doesn't work. That's not what they want. That's not what they want to do.